right. Welcome, everybody, to this fantastic Thursday, September 21st. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you happen to be watching this, either live or on the recording. Thank you for joining us today. We have, I think, a fantastic show today on use cases for Adobe Commerce. So we're going to dig deep into Adobe Commerce, extensibility model, talk about a bunch of different use cases where App Builder can be used to extend and integrate to various systems. So we did a use case I did a use case show about a month ago where I talked about use cases just in general for App Builder around kind of all of DX. But today we're going to really focus on Adobe Commerce. But before we get started, one of the things I wanted to mention, and I've mentioned this in the past as well, is we have a new Adobe Developers Live conference coming up. So if you are a developer, and hopefully you are, and you're watching this session, register for Adobe Developer Live. We will have sessions focused on AEM, sessions focused on extensibility, as well as commerce. So pretty much all of the kind of content and commerce area will be covered in Adobe Developers Live. So definitely you can hit that QR code, and when I get a second, when my guest Surya joins, I will throw the link up into chat. Oh, and before I forget, if you would like to ask questions during today's session, please make sure that you are logged into YouTube, which will then unlock or allow you to add questions. And then we will take questions at the end. And I'll go through the chat and see if there's any questions, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, let me bring in Surya. How's it going, man?
You're on. How's it going?
It is going well. So there's a fun fact I just wanted to mention for folks watching. I've worked with Surya for a bit, I would say at least a year or so. And yeah, apparently he does not live on the West Coast. He lives in Virginia. So that is pretty fantastic. Is it nice in Virginia at this point? Is it kind of getting fall weather, or is it still summer?
It is. It's been pretty pleasant the past 2 weeks, I guess, after a pretty hot and dry summer. We're having nice 70-degree weather, a couple of showers off and on. So perfect weather to be in Virginia, actually, if you plan on visiting.
Right on. That is fantastic. All right. So you were going to talk about use cases for App Builder with Adobe Commerce. Yeah?
Yes. I'll let you know when I can get started.
Yeah. Actually, why don't you go ahead and get started now, and let me throw your slides up and go for it.
All right. Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me on App Builder Live. And thanks everyone else who's joined us from all over or going to view this on demand later. So I'm Surya Lamech, Product Marketing Manager for Adobe Commerce, and my focus is on our platform and extensibility. I do have my email address up on this slide, and the reason for that is that if you have questions that we aren't able to get to today, either due to time or because I just don't know the answer to it, you're most welcome to reach out to me, and I will try and get you the answers you need or have any discussion you'd like about this. So we're going to talk about App Builder use cases for Adobe Commerce. Now I realize, or I presume, that some of you on this webinar may be familiar with App Builder, but not so much with Adobe Commerce, and others may be more familiar with Commerce, but less with App Builder. So bear with me as I spend the first few minutes talking through some of the foundational concepts of both App Builder and Adobe Commerce, and I promise you we will get right to the use cases very, very shortly after. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the focus our focus for the Adobe Commerce platform. And by that, what I mean is some of the larger themes that drive our product roadmap. So as we group those together, the things that we look at when determining what goes on our roadmap, what do we deliver to our customers, are first of all, fast time to launch. So we want our customers to be able to get value from our product, from Adobe Commerce, very, very quickly without having a long setup time. And it's not just the initial launch, but being able to adapt and evolve quickly or in an agile manner as their needs change or the market changes or they grow. So that fast time to launch is key to our customers and therefore to us. The second is data and personalization. So making it simple for our customers to be able to capture events and data happening across their storefront properties, back office, wherever, and being able to act on those to deliver contextual and personalized experience to their shoppers. The third is around extensibility. Now, if you have history with Adobe Commerce or prior to that Magento, it has always been one of the most flexible, if not the most flexible commerce platforms in the market. So our goal here is to keep that, that leadership position and extensibility while providing developers with newer tools, frameworks, and services that make their lives more easier and essentially make it faster to develop, easier to maintain. The fourth is scale for the enterprise. And by scale, we actually look at scale in two different ways. One is maybe slightly more traditional definition, which is the ability to manage large product catalogs or high throughput of orders or large volumes of page views and so on. And the second is scaling the business. That means the ability to maybe onboard large numbers of vendors, managing multiple brands, rolling out to additional regions, adopting new business models. So the ability to scale in both those ways is important to our customers. And of course, in the commerce world and across the digital world, in fact, data protection and security across all of our initiatives that we go through. So with that, let's look at what the digital commerce scenario is currently. So if you look at commerce, and if you are from a commerce background, you know this, commerce is getting more, has always been complex, but it's getting more and more complex. Product catalogs are growing. The number of touch points or interactions you have with your shoppers across different channels is expanding. Personally, I might discover a product on one channel and I might buy it on a different channel. I want choice in how I pay for that, whether it's with my credit card, some other payment service, or maybe I want to buy now, pay for it later. How I receive my goods or my items that I purchase are again, something that I would like choice in. Do I just have it shipped to my home, or do I want to pick it up at the store nearby? And then getting support for those, I might have different ways, whether it's over phone, email, or maybe even DMs on a social network, and then being able to return it if I so choose to, whether I'm shipping it back, or maybe I'd like to drop it off at the neighborhood grocery store. And this actually gets exponentially harder when you're talking about B2B and multiple distribution centers, very, very large product catalogs, different pricing models, and so on. Now, in order to address those needs, businesses are relying on more and more services, often from multiple vendors or sometimes even built in-house for things like managing their product catalog, payments, web content, cart and checkout, personalization, and so on. And of course, vendors are also technology vendors like Adobe are stepping up and providing our technology or our solutions primarily as services with APIs, which customers can then use to interact with these services. But as a developer, you probably realize that having a service with an API is just the first step, right? I mean, that's the foundational building block. But then once you have those services with APIs, you need to figure out how to orchestrate all those APIs and data across these services. So what does that mean? I mean, how do you transfer data in different forms, different schemas across these solutions, sometimes in batch, sometimes in real time, depending on the need? APIs that come from different sources, sometimes REST APIs, sometimes GraphQL, maybe sprinkle in a little SOAP as well. All of that is fairly complex. And above that, you also have to deal with multiple developer tools, SDKs, front-end components, and frameworks. Then you have to deploy and operate all of this. And once you're done with that, you obviously have to monitor for things like security, performance, and compliance. So as we said, commerce is getting overly complex. So what is our approach to help our customers simplify their entire commerce application? And our approach is, well, we start with our commerce foundation. And what we mean by the commerce foundation is the set of capabilities or core capabilities that include things like managing your product catalog, cart and checkout, managing brands and stores and regions, potentially managing pricing or promotions. These are fundamental core capabilities of commerce that any business that sells a product requires. And our goal here is to provide a foundation that customers can get started with very, very fast without having to tie together those core capabilities. And of course, we are focusing on security, performance, and flexibility with our foundation so that it can evolve as our customers' needs change. Now, accompanying that foundation are a set of, I would say, somewhat advanced services that customers adopt as they need. Now, these services could be part of the Adobe Commerce solution, things like intelligent search that we call live search, personalized product recommendations, catalog service, payments, and so on. But it also could include services from the larger Adobe ecosystem for analytics, web content, digital assets, customer data platform, and so on. Now, the idea with these services is that while a customer can adopt and roll them out as they need them, but they work natively with the Commerce Foundation so that developers don't need to figure out how to tie together our search capability with our Commerce Foundation. That, of course, leads to faster time to value, but also lowers the cost of ownership because we manage those integrations, or we manage how those services work with the Commerce Foundation. But it doesn't stop there, right? I mean, we don't just give our customers a product and with an API and say, go and build, or you can build whatever you need, but you have to do everything yourself. Customers rely on a number of third-party services, as I mentioned earlier, along with custom applications that they have built. And we want to provide, or we do provide our customers with the tools, the services, and the frameworks that they require to stitch together those third-party services with Adobe Commerce in a more easily maintainable way. And of course, there are often needs to build maybe small microservices or custom apps, etc., for very unique niche needs, in which case you may not have a third-party service. And even there, we provide customers with the tools and the runtime in order to be able to build and deploy those apps at a low cost of ownership. And finally, we make it easier. We provide the piping to share data and events across those three pillars. So whether it's our foundation, services from Adobe or third parties, or custom apps that a customer may have built, being able to share data and events across all of them in a reliable and uniform way. At the heart of our strategy is Adobe Developer App Builder. And if you're not familiar with it, App Builder is our uniform or unified extensibility platform. And I use unified in two ways here. I guess and I'll explain why. The first is unified in that it provides you with all the tools and services you need to integrate, replace, or upgrade or update third-party services with Adobe Commerce. You can use App Builder to extend native capabilities. So any features that we ship, typically, if you need to customize them or extend them, you can use App Builder to do that. You can build event-driven apps or reactive apps for Adobe Commerce that rely on changes within Commerce or third parties, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And finally, you can run all those apps in a cloud-native environment that automatically scales, and which is key for Commerce, it's a PCI-compliant environment. So that's why I say it's a unified extensibility platform. But the second reason it's unified in that it not only works with Adobe Commerce, but with other Adobe solutions as well. So it's available for Adobe Experience Manager and Adobe Experience Platform, which means that you could build apps in App Builder using the same concepts for various products across our portfolio. So moving on to Adobe Commerce, let's talk about some of the extension points we have for developers to work with our product. The first is, of course, our API, right? So we have a comprehensive GraphQL and REST API depending on your need. And we can use API Mesh, which is a feature within App Builder that allows you to orchestrate the API from Adobe Commerce, other Adobe solutions, and third-party solutions. What that means is that you can essentially build applications that consume API from Adobe Commerce or other services, but really all of our API would be combined into a unified or a single graph within API Mesh so that front-end applications like, say, storefront, or upstream applications like a storefront don't need to understand how to connect with or how to authenticate with all those services behind the scenes. They just query the API Mesh, and the API Mesh will determine where that data needs to come from, if it's one or multiple sources, how to mesh them together, and then deliver that response. The second is our Admin UI SDK. Now, Often when you want to provide some enhanced capabilities to your business users, you have to extend the UI, the out-of-the-box admin UI that we provide. With the Admin UI SDK, you can build apps within App Builder, single-page apps within App Builder, and inject them in a secure way with authentication into the Adobe Commerce admin to provide those enhanced business user capabilities. The third is serverless extensibility, and that is the ability to take our native commerce features and extend them in Adobe App Builder, in Adobe Developer App Builder, in basically a serverless environment. So very little code to extend capabilities that we provide with commerce. And the fourth is event-driven integrations. So that is near real-time integrations where an event occurs, for example, changes to our product catalog, customer accounts, orders, etc. And then you can use that to invoke certain apps or integrations using an app builder. So using these extension points, I would group the use cases we are going to go through into three themes, I guess, or three buckets. The first is to accomplish back office integrations, which are obviously key to some of our larger customers, things like ERPs, PIMs, order management, and so on. They may be managing these in back office systems. And essentially what we're solving for here is synchronizing data. So usually the use cases in these integrations revolves around synchronizing data between commerce and other systems, products from your PIM into Adobe Commerce, orders from Adobe Commerce into ERPs, and so on. The second thing is composable storefronts, which means being able to manage multiple or a single storefront, which relies on a number of services for various things, some from Adobe, some from third parties, and being able to bring together those APIs using the API mesh, as I mentioned earlier, in a way that makes it easy to maintain. So you should be able to adopt new services, new APIs, replace existing services into API mesh without having to do large-scale refactoring of the upstream applications, whether that's a storefront managed by Adobe, third-party storefront, or even a marketplace elsewhere. And of course, the ability to build custom apps, whether they're single-page apps or microservices, in essentially a low-cost way. So with all the modern developer tooling, while we take care of all the runtime, capacity, storage, CDN, and all of that for you. So with that, let's jump right in to the first use case that I would like to cover today. So in this scenario, we'll talk about integrating third-party review systems into Adobe Commerce. So take this. So in this scenario, the way we would implement it is a shopper on the storefront browsing and lands on a product detail page. Now the storefront can then make a single call to the API mesh in order to get the details to populate that page. The API mesh now can federate that across multiple sources. It can go to Adobe Commerce to get the specific product data from the catalog and render that on the page. But it can enhance it with potentially product recommendations from our product recommendation services and also get reviews from the third-party system. Now, all of these can be combined into a single response at the API mesh. We can cache some of this as well. Depending on what that data is, we could actually cache it using the API mesh. If we need to, we can extend the response or transform that response in any way that's required for the storefront, and then render it back to the storefront or the shopper's browser to paint that entire page. So what this does is it simplifies the development process for you. As a storefront developer, you no longer need to know about the underlying services that power each individual element that you need to paint on the page. As you incorporate services, typically you do that just through configurations without having to write any code. If you choose to extend them, you can do that simply using JavaScript at the API mesh to transform any of the data or extend any of that. With this approach also, you don't need to write any custom code or customize any parts of the product of Adobe Commerce itself or any of our services or even the third-party service, which means that it's simpler to maintain those applications. And there's no costly upgrades involved because of code that has to be refactored, because of that abstraction layer that API mesh creates between the shoppers or between the storefront or any upstream application and those backend services. Next, let's take a look at an ERP system. Now, when integrating commerce with ERP system, which by the way happens to be probably the most common integration that across all of our commerce customers is integrations with ERPs. But ERP integrations aren't one size fits all, meaning different people, different customers use the ERP for various things. You may use it to manage your customer information. You may use it to manage your inventory or pricing, various things that you might be using it for. In this case, we'll take an example of ERP for orders, meaning when orders get created in Adobe by a shopper in Adobe Commerce, those orders need to be sent over to the ERP potentially for fulfillment. So let's go through the process flow here. As a shopper lands on the checkout page and completes that checkout process, the storefront in the shopper's browser will send that request back to Adobe Commerce in order to create that order. Now, when that order gets created in Commerce, it will emit an event. And Adobe Commerce has over 700 events, but let's talk about the order create event right now. So that Commerce event will be sent to IO events pipeline, which is essentially a way for us to pipe events from across Adobe Commerce and other solutions across our Experience Cloud and even Creative Cloud. These events can go into IO events. And a developer can build an app builder that subscribes to a specific event. In this case, you would write an app that subscribes to an order created event. That means that whenever such an event is received by IO events, that app will be notified and thus invoked. Now, that app can do a couple of things. It could maybe just send that order as is to the ERP system, or it could potentially come back to Commerce, get some additional data, maybe transform the data in a way that fits a format that the ERP is expecting, and then send it over to the ERP system. Now, the benefits of using this approach are, first of all, our events are natively integrated into App Builder, which means that you don't have to write any custom code for this. All of our events can be consumed by IO events, and then you can build your apps to use them. There's no need to write any custom code within Adobe Commerce, which once again means there's no cost of maintenance over time or any challenges with upgrades. The third thing is that actually the events, the way we've implemented this eventing model, is it's very flexible. So while we have over 700 events that are emitted from Adobe Commerce, you can configure the specific events you actually want to surface into IO events. So you may choose to only send order-related events, or maybe product catalog events, or customer account events. So whichever ones you need, you surface only those. And secondly, you can also configure the payload of those events. So let's say an order gets created. Maybe that order has about 25 different attributes in it, or pieces of data in it. You can actually configure which of those pieces are required and not send more data than you actually require for this particular app. So you configure the fields you want, and only those ones get sent across to IO events, to the app, and from there on to the ERP system. Now, continuing with the ERP system, another use case could be an order shipped update. So when an order actually gets shipped, you need to show that in the customer's account. If they visit the Adobe Commerce storefront, they might want to see what their order status is. So with our eventing model, it's not just about events from Adobe solutions, but you can create a custom event provider, which could be your ERP system or any application that you might want. So what that means is you can set up your ERP system as an event provider. So when the shipment status changes in the ERP, the same process as we did before for the order created can happen in reverse. So this time, the ERP would send an event into IO events. There, it would invoke an app, which would, of course, be subscribed to that event. And that can use our Shipment API to update the ship status within Adobe Commerce. So now when a customer logs into their account in the storefront, they will be able to see the updated status of their shipment. Now, of course, some of the benefits of this approach is you have a uniform way of handling your data and events across different solutions. It is resilient, it is scalable. You can batch the event sending if you want to, or send them one by one. It has journaling and retrying, which means that if for some reason there is a network failure or something, you can journal and then retry it at a later time. And of course, it helps build near real-time or event-driven integrations between Adobe Commerce and ERP systems. And I'm not going to repeat this each time, but you probably have seen a theme that all of these integrations or use cases that we are talking through, they require no custom code to be written within the Adobe Commerce application, or in some cases, even your own third-party application, which means that maintenance of these integrations over time becomes much, much simpler for you. Upgrades for those applications become much, much simpler. So your overall cost of ownership goes down while being able to write these integrations in a serverless environment with very minimal code. So the third one that I'm going to talk about again is ERP related, and this could relate to, there could be a couple of different use cases, but this is more of a read kind of a use case. So often product availability might be stored in an ERP. So when an order is placed, you may need to figure out which warehouse are these items sitting in, or which store are these sitting in. So if I'm browsing, I'm on a website trying to buy a hoodie, as I am right now trying to buy for my teenage son, who is quite difficult to shop for. What we often need to do is go through the website and identify products, but then you want to see its availability in particular sizes in potentially a store near you so that you can go and take a look at it yourself in store. So that information might be in an ERP. So once again, here, what you could do is, let's say a customer lands on a product category page, which is essentially a listing of products within the category. Now that the storefront can send a request back to Adobe to API Mesh, and the API Mesh then could actually call a serverless app sitting in App Builder. Now that app can get the products in the category from the Commerce Catalog service, but then it could match it to product availability sitting in an ERP, determine the appropriate set of results to return, send back a single response to the API Mesh, which will then send those results back to the browser to show products that are available maybe close by or in particular sizes or colors that the shopper is looking for. So again, the integrations, the availability of our services like catalog services, search service, etc., they are all natively integrated in or available to be used with API Mesh should a customer choose to adopt those services. And the API Mesh allows you to then configure in the API from third-party sources like an ERP, and you can implement your more complex business logic within an App Builder serverless app. Similar to the product availability use case is also B2B pricing. So if you're in B2B, pricing can become very, very complex. So depending on the negotiated rates with various customers, you might have different price books for products across your different customer groups. And that pricing is often handled within an ERP. So once again, similar to the flow is actually very similar to the previous use case, which was determining availability based on maybe geographic region. In this case, it's determining pricing based on the current customer account. So once again, the storefront could, if a customer is browsing through the product catalog, they could go, the storefront would make a request to API Mesh, which will then, of course, federate the requests and send the appropriate requests to Adobe Commerce, potentially to product recommendations, as well as the ERP to get the bits of data that are required. One of the interesting things about API Mesh is that you can actually replace fields from one response to another. And what that means is, let's say you have default pricing stored within Adobe Commerce. So a customer's not logged in, there's default pricing. Maybe you show that, you get that from Adobe Commerce. However, the customer is logged in and you need to get customer-specific pricing. You can now make a call to the ERP, get back the pricing, and replace the field within the response that came from Adobe Commerce. So Adobe Commerce provided the default pricing, but the ERP pricing can be provided back and replace that default within the Adobe Commerce response, and that is returned to the shopper's browser. Which means your storefront application did not need to know where that pricing came from, whether it's coming from Commerce or from the ERP system, because the API Mesh handled that logic. And any changes to the response from any of those systems can once again be transformed at the API Mesh level, reducing any ongoing refactoring or maintenance on the storefront or on any other upstream application. I think this is the last use case that I have, so let me go through this now. It's an integration with a search engine. So with a search engine, you could have multiple use cases, but in this case, in this scenario, I'll talk about two of them. So the first is essentially querying for particular search results. So when you query for a search term, the query could go to API mesh, which will then go to the search engine to get back the products related to the search term. And then the additional product attributes can come back from Adobe Commerce. So the actual results come from the search engine. It's merged together with the product details that come from Adobe Commerce. And then those results are returned back to the shopper's browser. However, there's a second use case of making sure your results are always refreshed and up to date. And in that case, you can use IO events in addition to API mesh. So both of those being used together. So whenever there is a change to the product catalog, we can send out or emit an event to IO events. And there you can have an app sitting in App Builder that subscribes to that event. Once it gets it, it can indicate to the search engine that a product has been added or updated or even removed. And then the search engine can trigger the reindexing of that so that you always get fresh results on search back to your storefront. And actually, there was one more that I had over here, which is around integrating assets from a third-party digital asset management system. In this example, we're going to talk about admin UI extensibility. So imagine where you have your products managed within Adobe Commerce, but the related assets, whether those are PDF documents, videos, or images, sit in a third-party DAM. Now, you may want to associate those assets with the product sitting in Adobe Commerce. Now, in order to do that, what you could do is build a single-page app sitting in App Builder, and that app would be able to query your digital asset management system and get back assets based on that query. Now, using the Admin UI SDK that we provide, you can take that single page app and inject it into our Admin UI on the product editing page. And there, so now when a business user comes in to update a product, they could actually invoke the single page app, browse assets from the third-party digital asset management system, and associate those assets with the product sitting in Adobe Commerce. Now, there are quite a few benefits to this. First of all, it's a fairly common use case, needing to provide additional business user features within the admin console. And here you're able to do it without modifying Adobe Commerce at all, simply building those apps in App Builder. And you can use that to extend menus within Adobe Commerce, pages, and product features. The second is we provide you with a set of UI components that you can use to build these apps, and they follow our design language, which means that when you build your single page apps to enhance our admin console, they will actually look and feel exactly like the rest of the Adobe Commerce admin. So for a business user, it's not like they're using two different systems. It's like just native. It would look like almost native to the Adobe Commerce admin. Third is these apps can be injected securely, which means that they leverage the same IMS or identity management authentication that we use for commerce. And that way we can leverage that same authentication and securely inject that into the Adobe Commerce UI. So what you would do is build these apps, provide them in a registry, and then the Adobe Commerce admin console, we have the backend UIX and a UIX component, which provide two things. One does the registry, the other makes it possible to load those apps within the admin console. So once again, I'll say this, all of this is designed to make it much, much faster for you to be able to build these apps, extensions, etc., and in a way that makes all of your applications upgrade friendly, which means that you don't have to spend a lot of time to upgrade, maintain, or refactor code as time goes by and as you have to manage these extensions. Now, I know I said this was the last, but I did want to give you a sneak peek into an upcoming capability. And when I say upcoming, it's expected to launch next month. And you probably saw those first four extension points around APIs, serverless extensibility, admin UI, and event-driven integrations. The fifth point we are introducing is webhooks. And that allows for synchronous calls, meaning real-time injection of logic into a process that's running in Adobe Commerce. So if I didn't mention it before, the IO events we spoke about are primarily about, and I've used the term near real time, primarily about asynchronous integrations, which means that something happens in commerce, we need to notify another system to do something about it. But sometimes you need a reaction which is in real time. And that's when you would use these webhooks to essentially intercept something happening within Adobe Commerce and inject logic sitting outside an app builder into that process. So let's take a look at a use case for that. Now, if you've ever gone through a checkout process, you look at prices, you add products to your cart, but as you go through checkout and then actually do go through payment and finish the checkout process, we have to calculate things like shipping rates, tax calculations, etc. And there might be other validations. There are many use cases for this, but I'll focus here on tax or shipping costs. So in this scenario, when a shopper goes through that checkout process, as they click on checkout, the webhook will intercept that process and it'll make a call out to the system to a third-party service that provides maybe the shipping costs or the tax costs. It'll bring back those figures, inject them into that process so that the checkout process will then persist that into Adobe Commerce and then complete the checkout using those prices or rather using those costs for tax and shipping. And that allows you to not just display these prices on the storefront, which can easily be done by API Mesh, as we saw in a couple of different examples. Just rendering that information you can do that with API Mesh. But now you can actually use those costs that come from a third-party service and inject them into that process, persist them into the order over there, and create the order based on that. And again, this requires zero customization to the Adobe Commerce core, which means that you don't have to make any PHP changes or anything like that. You write everything in apps sitting in App Builder, and then and basically that simplifies the whole development process. So there are a number of use cases for this. Typically for I mean, of course, tax and shipping are probably the most common, but you could use them for various things like validating the customer's shipping address or validating the credit card details provided, etc. So anything where you need to integrate a third-party service, get back data in real time and inject that into a process that happens within Adobe Commerce, you can do that using webhooks. If you have some very complex pricing rules that you need to execute before the checkout process, you can write an app with an app builder that executes those rules and then add that into the checkout process in order to customize or build your unique needs that you might have. So with that, and this actually was my last use case that I had to present. So with that, I'm going to stop here and maybe go back to Ron and see how we want to handle any questions that might have come up.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, Surya. If you could go back to one of the slides. Yeah, that one. Just the lighting is better, certainly, than read from your screen.
Little things.
Exactly, little things. All good. So one of the questions we had, which is, I think, pretty relevant to what you were talking about, certainly on events and such. Can we talk a little bit more on journaling and the retry mechanism in shipping update scenario? Actually, maybe go back to that slide.
Okay.
On the kind of shipping update. Yeah, there you go. So, if an ERP call fails to App Builder or App Builder to Commerce call is failed, how can that be addressed? So, I guess let me ask you, Surya, is this using journaling? So is this where it's not real time, where the calls are put into a journal? Generally, there's a couple of ways of doing events, right? One of them is the near real time, and the other one is, so it's a push or a pull. One of them is you just put all your things into a journal and then you pull them as your system kind of has the slack to do that. So it's things that are, not time critical. I'm guessing this is probably a time critical one. I don't know.
Yeah. So this is near real time, which means that the event will be put into the IO event pipeline, and then it'll flow through that depending on the events that are already there. So we would call it near real time in this case. Now you have a choice of whether you want to batch events up, meaning you could, so depending on the number of events, you may not want to hit your Adobe Commerce system from the ERP let's say there are 1,000 events, orders that were updated, you may not want to send 1,000 individual events, which means that you can batch those up. So that's an option when you configure the events. You can choose whether you want to batch them or not. And then when you enable journaling, they will remain in the journal for, I think by default, 7 days. And if the call from IO events to commerce fails, then you can go back and retry the journal and push those events out again at a later time.
Right on. That's great. Okay, and thank you for the question, Yogesh. Hopefully that answered your question. We have another question from Alex here. Would it be possible to share the same app between multiple projects in terms of security? So share the same app. Let me, I guess, give a little bit of foundation on how App Builder works, which may answer this, and then Surya, I'll let you jump in. But when you build a project in App Builder, you're essentially going into our developer console. You're creating a project, and then you're essentially hooking up those APIs and writing your code, etc. If you wanted to use the same kind of microservice or the same code between multiple, if you had multiple projects that do different things, but you have this one piece of code that does a serverless app that does the same thing, you could copy those. I mean, it would be kind of a copy and paste. But I don't know, Surya, do you have another insight into the?
No, I think you covered it, at least from the way I understood the question. I think I don't have anything to add to what you said.
Okay. Yeah. So, and Alex, if you've got any follow on for that, happy to go through that. One of the first questions we got when we were talking about App Builder is Sunil's like, "Hey, so how can I get access to App Builder?" And I posted in the chat that we'll get to that at after we cover the use cases. And then one of the reasons is there's a couple of different ways, right? So there is this, which is, you go to the App Builder page and there's a try App Builder button when you go to this page. So if you're a customer and you wanted to try App Builder, you would go through this process. If you are a customer who's purchased, I don't know, Surya, if you want to talk about kind of the licensing route and kind of the different pieces there.
Yeah, so if you're a customer who has Adobe Commerce on cloud, then you automatically have, you are eligible to have App Builder access included with your Adobe Commerce license. However, you would need to reach out to your account teams, CSM, or whoever you work with at Adobe, to have them provision that for you. But essentially, if you're on cloud, you can get App Builder just included with your Commerce license. If you're a partner, if you go to the Solution Partner portal, under Resources, you should see an option called Sandboxes. And when you click on Sandboxes, you will see the ability to request sandboxes for various Adobe solutions, including Adobe Commerce and Adobe App Builder.
All right. Awesome. Okay, so we got another. So Alex has potentially a follow-on question. Have you made performance benchmarking, and will it delay order place process if we use order place event and synchronously send data to the ERP? One of the things I want to mention is just before I let you go, Surya, is we did a session about a month and a half ago on performance tuning for App Builder, and we talk a lot about kind of how to optimize different things with App Builder with your code that will allow it to perform faster. We talk about cold starts, how to ensure that you don't get cold starts, and that's essentially when you have code in your serverless app that's running in our cloud. How do you set it up so that it's not spinning up a container to run it from scratch, rather using a kind of a pre-warmed container? So definitely check that out if you haven't. And Surya, do you have any insight about?
No, I think you covered that. I mean, so Ron here is the app builder expert. I'm more on the commerce side of here, but I think Ron essentially covered some of the performance optimizations that you would do in order to.
Yeah, and so synchronously. So I'm wondering, you had mentioned that this feature that's going live next month, where you've got real time synchronous processing. If that will, have we seen any issues, I guess, so far with the the near real time stuff that we've been doing, or not exactly yet?
No, I'm not aware of that. There are patterns to follow depending on, there are obviously depending on the volumes you're planning on handling over here. There are different ways you'd handle a different situation. So I think that's a little bit more of a conversation than just a yes or no answer to that one. I should point out that the webhooks that I mentioned, that does not use IO events, because IO events by nature is asynchronous. So the webhooks invokes, while it does invoke apps sitting in App Builder, it is synchronous, and it does not go through IO events in those cases.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Let's see. We have, let's go to this one. Said mentions, does App Builder provide a queuing system to capture the events for batching before being sent to the target system? And I think we talked about that in journaling, right? So that would be, setting up your events as a journal, where it's a pull rather than a push, right? So it goes into this journal, as I think Surya mentioned, like 7 days, and I agreed. I think it's like 7 days where events would go in there, and then they would get pulled based on whatever logic you had that you had built. And I think he had a follow-on, or the queuing system allows for successful transaction before removing from the queue. Yes. So if so say there's something that happens where the message doesn't get delivered, it will be retried until that message is successfully delivered, and then it gets removed from that queue. Let's see, on-prem commerce license. I'm not sure what Ryan's.
So, I think I understand that. So while App Builder is included at no additional cost, a certain capacity of it is included at no additional cost for customers on cloud. It is available for customers who are running commerce on-prem. However, they need to purchase App Builder capacity. So App Builder, as I mentioned, it's a set of tools, etc., that you need to build these apps. But then it's also runtime capacity that you need to run them, right? Whether it's the queuing or the event management system, whether it's the runtime for apps, the storage, CDN, etc. So if you are running Adobe Commerce on-prem, you can still use App Builder. However, you do need to license App Builder in that case. So once again, reach out to your account team, and they will help you through that process.
Okay, and then just a follow on. Eric's asking, can stores running on Magento open source ever utilize the compute engine for App Builder, or is the Adobe Commerce license a hard requirement?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. So yes, right now, App Builder is only available along with the license for other Adobe solutions. So either you get it along with Adobe Commerce, or with Adobe Experience Manager, or Adobe Experience Platform, and among other solutions. So it is not available standalone by itself. It's only available along with other Adobe solutions. So in that sense, yes. So if you have Magento open source and no other Adobe solution, then you wouldn't be able to get App Builder standalone as of right now.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that different from kind of general purpose serverless solutions that are on the market from either AWS or Microsoft or Google, App Builder is really tuned specifically for Adobe Experience Cloud use cases and Adobe Experience Cloud products. So the hooks that we build on top of our serverless solution, App Builder, and all of the other pieces that we give to you, like state storage, file storage, custom events, being able to build solutions where you can, while you can consume events from Adobe products, you could also emit events as well. So you can be an event producer. Those are things that you aren't going to get out of those other kind of general purpose without having to kind of build it or cobble together your own grouping of technology pieces. So anyways, yeah, that's all I'll add on that. And then as a webhook real time happens, if the service goes down, then how many times will it do a retry? And I think that it retries. Actually, I don't know if there's like a 60-minute. Let me check this.
I think I think that's referring to the Adobe Commerce feature that I.
Oh, okay. Sure.
So I'll actually, I don't know the answer to that question. So I will need to check on that, and I'll work with Ron on a way to get that answer back to you. I don't know that is.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So that's one that we can get back to you. We can add into the show notes. So if you come back to the recording, we'll put a link in there. You can also check out the Magento community forum and the Adobe Commerce forum. I can put the link into chat as well. Okay, so I know Adobe I/O provides webhook. Would you recommend using Adobe Commerce webhook in place of the I/O webhook? Is the payload different? Surya, I'm going to give it over to you.
Sure. I know the naming might sound a little confusing, but essentially many of our products have webhooks, and they may be used for different things. So the I/O events webhooks is essentially, and let me move to a different, maybe this one. So sending an order to an ERP system, right? So when we in this particular situation, an order created event within Commerce gets sent to I/O events. Now, when it goes to I/O events, there are two things that could happen. One is you could send it to an app that you build, an app builder, which will do something with that event. The second is you don't actually have to create any runtime action or app with an app builder. You just call a webhook on a third-party system. So you just say, here's the URL, and that event will be sent out to that webhook, and that's it. So we're done. We've sent it to that webhook. It's done. The webhooks so those are I/O events webhooks, which have been there for a while now, at least since I've been using them. On the other hand, the Adobe Commerce webhooks are to inject synchronous calls within a native commerce process. So when a product is getting updated, maybe you want a validation to happen somewhere else before that product gets updated, or a customer gets created, you want to validate their address or the fact that they actually work for the company that they say they do, or whatever. Or order gets created or a checkout is getting completed, you want to validate the shipping costs and tax. So those are two different use cases. One is for commerce events. So the I/O events webhooks is for commerce events or other events to asynchronously be sent to a webhook. The second, there is commerce webhooks, are for injecting logic synchronously within a commerce process. I hope that clarifies things.
Yeah, I think that was good. Okay, so we have one here on a couple. Okay, so what's the suggested CICD process for deploying App Builder apps? And with App Builder, we give you a CICD process built on GitHub Actions. So out of the box, that is what we recommend. You can bring your own CICD process. Whatever you have that you want to use is certainly flexible enough for you to do that. But out of the box, you can follow the tutorials that we have and leverage GitHub Actions for deploying those apps. Let's see. And then we have one on how can App Builder help extension development agencies, any use cases. So I'm not sure, Surya, if this is regarding kind of partners building solutions. I don't know if we want to talk about that or.
Sure. I can take that question. So
Yep.
typically when partners build extensions, essentially reusable extensions, you build them using PHP, which was a traditional model of extending Adobe Commerce. And you can put those on the Adobe Commerce marketplace. And that still is available. You can still do that. And we have thousands of extensions on the marketplace. However, our recommendation is to, going forward, build those kinds of extensions as app builder apps instead, because of all the benefits we spoke about, which is easy upgrades, faster build times, and lower maintenance, and so on. To facilitate that, we have introduced the process on our marketplace now to accept apps as well. So if you were to build an app in App Builder, which you want to list on our marketplace, we did launch that process, I think, about 3 months ago. So you can submit your apps over there. So it's from the same entry point as you would submit extensions. I think it's beneficial to our partners to use apps instead of app builders. There's less maintenance on your end as well to build them as apps versus having to do refactoring with each new version of Commerce or anything else. You can go ahead and submit those through our process. We also launched a new program we are launching a new program for assuring the quality of these apps, where we'll help you, give you the guidance and test and build those apps to certain quality standards in order to be certified by our program. So there are quite a few benefits to building those as apps. And I think we have introduced in all the extension points that you would traditionally use to customize the product. Now we've exposed them as extension points for you to instead build those in App Builder.
All right. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left. I know that you had a live demo that you were going to show us, Surya, so I wanted to...
You had me there for a moment.
Yes, exactly. So, no, I apologize, Mahesh, for not having a live demo for this session, but I did put in the chat the session that we did with Reply Comrap, where they showed what they were building in App Builder, and as a partner, the kind of taking building an application using kind of this framework. So there's Adobe Developers Live. Again, I'm gonna throw this up here. Definitely, if you want to register, there's the QR code. I'll put the link into the chat as well. But there's going to be a bunch of sessions on Adobe Commerce, as well as Adobe Commerce with App Builder for Adobe Developers Live. So definitely join us for that. And as I mentioned, we've got a bunch of kind of content both on the web. There's an Experience League. I know there's a bunch of great tutorials that have been done to get developers up to speed in using App Builder for Adobe Commerce. So definitely check those out. And Surya, thank you so very much for joining us from the other side of the planet, or our tiny little country here. So yeah, and thank you for being a fantastic partner on App Builder. So yeah, it's been great working with you guys and seeing where you've been taking App Builder and integrating it so beautifully with Adobe Commerce. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ron, and thanks everyone who joined us for this event. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, outstanding. Yeah, and if there was something we didn't get to, I put the link to the forum. Definitely throw it up there. And yes, thank you so very much for joining. Have an awesome day.